Okay, Patrick, we're on the last part. Now, people want to know about your punting, so we have to go back to the punting. When you wrote Enemy Number One, you'd won 10 million quid from the bookmakers. How much is it now?
Well, as I say, probably a different time, different place of mind when I wrote the book, and I wouldn't write it the same way now. Apologise for those people who felt it was all a bit much, and yeah, it's still my job. It's still my main job, although I've got other interests like the bloodstock and that sort of thing, and there'll be some other things over the years. Yeah, it's my main occupation and has been and still will be going forward, but I think people have seen enough of my figures for one lifetime.
Well, people watching this want to learn from you because you're one of the most successful punters there's been. So we'll ask you a few questions. Obviously, you're not going to tell us what you actually do, but first of all, how much does luck factor into your calculations?
Well, in some ways, probably more than it used to. That back in the day when you could get bigger bets on, then it was slightly more about trying to sculpt the perfect bet, trying to wait for something you really, really liked. Not just that, but you were certainly could be more selective and really like a situation for a bigger bet where you thought everything had come together. But now you spend too long on that, you can only increase your stakes so far anyway. So now having to embrace other situations. I remember back in the day, a fellow I knew was really keen on a horse that was pulled up last time out. I think it was 15-8. I was thinking, why would you want to go through the stress of a horse that ran terribly last time and might do again? And he said, well, the opposition were poor, and it just wasn't my way. But I've had to learn to adapt and go for situations that I wouldn't have liked before, where you've had to say, well, this horse has been completely out of form, or this horse is, bang in form but doesn't look good enough, but, the opposition today, this might happen, that might happen, it might get lucky, it might, steal an easy lead, or they might go too quick in front of it, or whatever. So yeah, having to embrace all sorts of possibilities and just simply to find more opportunities, yeah. So having to embrace that probably more, rather than just focusing on the type I really like.
Okay, as we've talked about, there's a hell of a lot of racing these days, so does anybody help you? I don't mean getting on, I mean with your selection process.
Yeah, not really in terms of I like to make my own decisions. There are people that help me in terms of the constituent parts, in terms of, I have people supplying me with reports and this, that and the other. But, so I start the day with a lot of work already done, but in terms of the decision-making process, I've always preferred to do that myself.
Okay, now when you've had a bet, do you stand on the sofa and ride a finish? Do you watch every race? Is that your
I watch every race, but very few of them live. That's probably something that should have been on my list, the first list. That, again, about being fast and saving time. Sure, there's afternoons that you really need, evenings you really need to see, because you want to see what happens in race 1 and race 2. It might, how much has the ground softened up or whatever. But on the other hand, and sure, there might be things that you learn, but that costs you time. And being able to play it back, fast forward, watch the replays, a lot of the time. And I want to have a very nice sort of enjoyable life, be it exercise, be it real life, socialising, friends, other things I want to do. So you've got to work efficiently. And the way I do it, and some people like to watch the whole afternoon, I'll watch very little racing live. And when I'm watching back a meeting, it means I can watch quickly. I will watch every race, but sometimes I might think, let's just wind forward a few furlongs and that sort of thing. If I feel I can in that situation, yeah. But yeah, it took a bit of discipline, because there's always that temptation to want to see how your money's going. But in the end, if you want to have do it to a very high standard and have a life outside racing, you've got to be very efficient with the time.
Okay, so how many bets a week would you have?
Yeah, well, we're back into the realms of the stingy bookmakers and their intelligent systems. So I think that's a question I'll have to duck.
Okay, so we know you're financially secure, but you must have been under a hell of a lot of pressure when you first started, before you were financially secure. How much sleep have you lost in your life because you chose to bet for a living?
I probably took it very, very seriously when I had a customer base as opposed to just punting for myself. There were times when I'd sort of wake up at night thinking, oh, crikey, I'm going to have to change that. Should I put a message on at 9 o'clock? I don't think I ever did. Should I change the message at 9 o'clock in the morning? And then, but yeah, in that comeback year, there was those first few months. Yeah, I was in a different world there, and that was certainly in the realms of big stress, and there were times when I'd be difficult sleep or that sort of thing. But in the end, it's evening out, and probably I've got better at the things I've talked about, the getting out there, the exercise and that sort of thing. That reduces the stress. But back in the day, for sure.
And was the enforced COVID break beneficial to you?
Yeah, I think it was. Time to regroup and that sort of thing. I did try to help with the COVID numbers. A friend of mine had contact with Matt Hancock, and there was a bit of a text exchange and that sort of thing. Yeah. Those bits that were mathematical weren't, in my view, done that well. But actually, this is a good example of applying logic, and of where you can find the solution to a problem by really understanding it, by not just churning the data or studying the races. One thing that an enormous amount of money was spent on was writing to people saying, will you take a blood test so we can establish what percentage of people have COVID? But the trouble is that was an optional test. And so, as I pointed out, it wasn't going to work, because the biggest time this was in the news was over Christmas. I think it was Christmas 2020. So they were doing a mass survey of people in both December and January. But the trouble with December is you're going to massively undercount the number of people with COVID, because broadly, if you divided the population into those that obeyed the rules and those that broke the rules, the rule breakers were very unlikely to say yes to the blood test in December, because they were out partying. And there were those type of people who were probably just a little bit less socially responsible, and some other people who objected to the way things had been done and didn't believe in lockdowns, etc. And they're entitled to their view. But there were also some people who were just very laissez-faire and just simply don't like rules in general, and they were more likely to be the ones exceeding the numbers out, socialising or that sort of thing, or going around to people's houses more than was allowed or wasn't allowed at all at the time. So in that situation, the people who say yes to the blood test are also the people more likely to be obeying the rules in terms of not catching COVID. So you're going to get a big undercount. When I put that point, it came back and said, oh yes, but we'll be able to compare it with next month. But of course you couldn't, because January was very different. December it was more open, and January was locked down. So come January, the rule breakers are much more likely to say yes to the blood test, because now they're bored, they're sat at home and they're bored. And so they're still not going to say yes quite as often as the sort of rule obeyers, but as a group, the rule breakers are much more likely to say yes to the test in January than December. So in the end, all that money, in my view, was completely wasted, because not only does it not give you the answer, it massively undercounts the answer of what percentage of the population had COVID, but it undercounts it by a way that you'll never know by what percentage, so the number is useless. And you can't even compare the next month, because all you can say confidently is the extent to which it will undercount it will be reduced in January, but again, you don't know how much. You don't know how much the undercount is in December, you don't know how much the undercount is in January, except that you know it's smaller. And so it's understanding those things of what affects it. It's having that logic. There's no data, there's no book about COVID that tells you that when you lock down people, rule breakers will accept the blood test more often. But that's something I'd have happily bet 16 to 1 on about. I was absolutely certain of it. And sometimes it's that ability to apply the logic even when you can't calculate the answer. Okay, now, obviously it's a high pressure job what you do. Why do you still do it? Because it can't be the money. I have had to probably put in more reasons to do it. There would have come a point where you think, well, I've done enough with this now, that I've saved well, I've invested well. But I did like the idea of putting an extra incentive. So obviously, it's one thing to save and to look after, friends and family and that sort of thing. But I thought over time I wanted to have something else motivating me. So I've set up 2 charities, and I had help with a couple of neighbours with the admin. One just deals with sort of a range of different donations, and the other one focuses on the homeless. So I've given a 4-bedroom house to the charity I've set up, and then the plan is every 4 years I'll give another one, and hopefully just keep building it up, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, assuming I live long enough. And that has definitely motivated me, thinking there's more than me standing to benefit. I've also done a bit of mentoring there, where there's people been through that difficult experience and now some of them wanting to go into business on their own, and just a little bit of business advice about the do's and don'ts and what to be careful of. And yeah, so that's definitely helped to motivate me to to keep on going, rather than thinking, well, take it easy now, because in the end I don't think I'd be happier for taking it easier. I've got plenty of balance in my life already, so it was good to have a reason to carry on.
Well, anybody that's watched this or read your book or known of you before will be under no illusion that you've been very, very successful. But everybody's got a chink in their armour. Have you got one?
Yes, I can get stuck in a groove. I like to, I suppose, hone a method. I can probably sometimes get too stuck on one way of doing things. I'm probably a pretty moderate poker player. Over the years, I like to think I did okay. I won a little tournament once, but it was a tiny tournament, and probably flatter myself. I could sustain myself on the bottom tables on a holiday in Las Vegas, but probably not much more than sustain myself. And the point there is that I don't want, the way I do it, I don't like to have to be adapting to what other people are doing. I don't like having to adapt my play. I want to just get on my own method. And having to adapt my play to what other people will think and what impression they will have, and having to adapt to what I think they're up to, that's just something I could never really embrace. And although my sort of career is easier that way, because you can just focus on what you're doing, I probably still can get stuck in a groove and sometimes need to shake myself out of it. Yeah.
Okay, now, do you think you're one of these people that would always succeed in any line of business that they decided to apply themselves to, or is your prowess at gambling an exceptional talent?
I don't know. Probably over time there will be a few. I'm certainly keen to invest in more bloodstock related things and a few projects there, so I'm sure that will test that a little bit. But maybe more just, as I say, even that's as an investor rather than actually getting involved with the business. I don't know. I suppose there's a part of you would like to think so, but it would be totally unproven. Yeah.
Have you diversified from gambling at all? Totally apart from the charity.
I'd say bloodstock. I've done property and shares and that sort of thing, but maybe one day I should be, thrown in to run a business. Run a chain of baker shops or something like that. I quite fancy that business of being able to, go around as a troubleshooter and what I would improve and that sort of thing. Whether having had my own way in terms of my working day every day, whether getting involved in minutiae I'd be as good, I don't know. It's certainly open to some doubt, but I'd give it a go if the opportunity came up.
Okay, and the final question: should the bookmakers still be scared of enemy number one?
Well, they're scared of everyone now, aren't they, Simon? I don't know if I contributed a tiny bit to that, but yeah, I think that's more just as we discussed that the landscape has changed. So, yeah, well, I suppose you'd say that's up to them.
Brilliant. Well, I'm sure they're listening intently. Patrick VEITCH, thank you very much.
No worries.